Hello, my name is William Lee, and you are watching the first episode of what will hopefully be a series on the novel The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And I should say a novel, yes, about the book, but it's not an analysis of the book per se. You can find plenty of those on YouTube, which is great. And if you haven't read the book before, there will be spoiler alerts in these episodes. The book was published in 1924, so it's the 100th anniversary this year, which is why I've decided to do this. And it was originally in German. And it was set in the town where I am staying now, Davos, Switzerland, which was both a big winter sport town and a resort and a health resort specifically for people suffering from tuberculosis. So you had very grand hotels, and it's too early to talk about the jet set, but that element was always here. And you had grand hotels mixed with grand sanatoriums that were luxurious and that were like grand hotels themselves, and also with charity sanatoriums and with pensions where individual patients could stay. So I thought, since I'm in Davos, and since I am living in an old, for the time being, in an old sanatorium, which is now a hotel, and it's the only sanatorium that was mentioned by name, by its real name in the Magic Mountain. It's not the sanatorium where Thomas and Katya Mann stayed, or Katya Mann stayed and Thomas visited her. That was Wald Sanatorium. But Schatzalp is unique because it was absolutely the most luxurious, and it was up on a mountain plateau, whereas Wald Sanatorium is also above Davos, but at a much lower level. So I am, certain months of the year, the historian in residence here at Schatzalp. And my background actually is in Russian history. I have a PhD in Russian history. So I first came here in 1994, researching the life of one of the more interesting members of the Romanov dynasty of Russia, Grand Duke Dmitri of Russia. And if you know Dmitri at all, then you probably know him as one of the men who participated in the Rasputin assassination. And then later, he's very well known to have been, for 1 year, a lover of Coco Chanel's. But he came here when he was in his 40s. After all, that was over, and in 1939. He died here in 1942, and his diary that he kept while he was here, and the letters he wrote to various people while he was here, I have been very fortunate to gain access to, and so they are my best source of what life was like here, specifically at Schatzalp. Excellent source, very interesting, but a completely different time period from when the Manns were here, and when the setting of the Magic Mountain, which was from 1907 to 1914, Dmitri was here from 1939 to 1942. So it's interesting to see what the parallels and what the differences were. And so I will be referring to Dmitri's experience, also my own experience here and what I've learned about Schatzalp and about Davos history. So I'm not a literature scholar. I know the book well. I've read it about 11 times. And those are my qualifications. I'm a historian researching Davos history and Schatzalp history. And yeah, so if you find that you're not getting an analysis of the book, this is more, I think this program would be ideal if you want to read along, or if you've already read the book and you want a little more background, not on Thomas Mann himself, not on the literary aspects of the book, but on yeah, what the reality was here in Davos. So the book, as any of you know who have read it, was very, it's a big book. It's over 800 pages, and it's very philosophical and very mystical, and it's multi-layered. So you also have a strong political aspect to it. It ends with the outbreak of the First World War. And when I was yesterday reviewing the prologue to the book, one of the things that struck me immediately was that, so you have this division, right, in the prologue, or the foreword, I should say, to the narrator describes a certain turning point, a rift in life, in the world, especially in Europe. And that rift, of course, is the First World War. So you have, to begin with, this really profound split between the world that Hans Castorp inhabits and his fellow patients inhabit here in Davos leading up to the First World War, and then what life was like everywhere after the First World War. And so that's a very practical, analytical kind of aspect to the book, but that is offset by the sort of mystical, philosophical topic and theme of time. Time as a subjective phenomenon rather than a mechanical phenomenon. So those two things are in juxtaposition, not really in opposition. So to begin with, let's take a look around. I am at this moment in what is called in German my pronunciation isn't good, but the Chefarztzimmer. So it was the consulting room, an office of whoever at any given time was the head doctor at Schatzalp. And now it is used as a nice little cozy reading room and TV room. Really nice place to sit if you're at the hotel. Here's a view outside the window. Schatzalp is in the middle of a botanical garden. You can see how pretty it is. Things to note, this extra wide door, you only find these in the medical wing of the hotel because they were patients who needed to be, who couldn't walk, who needed to be moved in with gurneys, maybe with attachments. They could go through these extra wide doors or be pushed through. And here's something you don't see in many hotel TV rooms, the sink where the doctor could wash up. And this a door to the next consulting room. So another purpose of this video series is to encourage you, if you possibly can, especially if you're a fan of the novel, to come to Davos and experience it for yourself. And so if you're here staying at Schatzalp and you want a little private time to read, very often this room is empty and you can come in here and enjoy it. So I've set up a little display here. I've got hats. And as you can see, I'm sort of in a Slavic-style dress right now, and this hat is actually from Poland. And Schatzalp and the other sanatoriums, particularly before the First World War, had patients from all over the Slavic countries of Europe. And Thomas Mann speaks specifically about Russians, and it's quite true, it's quite accurate that at that time there were lots of Russians at Schatzalp, at Wald Sanatorium, at all of the sanatoriums. A big Russian colony, permanent Russian colony. Well, permanent until the outbreak of the First World War, and then it more or less disappeared. They had their own library, they had their own Russian charity balls every year. They laid the foundation for a Russian Orthodox church, but when the war broke out, the property was sold. And that was abandoned. So I have my hats here. This evening, Switzerland is playing in the Euro Cup against Scotland. So I will be wearing this hat. This is my Schatzalp hat. When I want to get away from the computer screen, I like to go out front here and rake these garden paths. And I wear my Schatzalp hat, and I love it when people come up and talk to me and ask questions. This is an old concierge's hat. So these aren't in use anymore. I'm not sure how old this specific one is, but I have a photograph from 1914, which you'll see at some point in the series, that shows a hat exactly like this one, although this one probably came later. And it is typical of what you would have seen, and it's what Thomas Mann describes in when Joachim, and who's Hans's cousin that he's coming to Davos to visit, meets Hans at the train station with the concierge from the Berghof Sanatorium, and he's wearing a braided hat just like this. Does this one fit me? I think it's a little small. Let's see. Yeah, it could be a little bigger. Okay, so another thing I have here in this display, and I'm learning how to do this. I don't know how to do this very adeptly. This is a bound collection of the newspaper, the little paper that was here for tourists and also for sanatorium and hotel guests. And it has this one is from 1914, and it has ads. You can see this is the sanatorium that the Manns were actually staying in, Wald Sanatorium. It's probably like a mirror image, so you can't read it. I'll have to sort out these bugs. Here's the Hotel Kurhaus, which had the same owners as Schatzalp, and it was right at the bottom of the funicular station going up to Schatzalp, so Schatzalp would have been up here. And this arcade, now called the Kulturplatz, still exists, and you'll recognize it if you come here to Davos. So we're sort of starting with the end, because Thomas Mann in the foreword starts at the end talking about the rift, the thing that divided time in Europe and in the world to before the First World War and after the First World War. And here is the first issue of the Davoser Blätter that was published after the war broke out. So they had to they had to suspend publishing for a little while, and then you have it resume on September 1914. 3 languages, so German, French, and English. And the English says, all the hotels, sanatoriums, and pensions at Davos are open and offer excellent accommodation to visitors of all nationalities without rise in prices. The course of events in neighboring countries is without influence on the quiet life of the resort, and therefore on the good results of the cure. There are now over 1,700 visitors. But I can tell you that this book is all of the issues for the second half of 1914, beginning in July. And the book for the first half of 1917 is twice as big, because it was hard, for whatever reason, to get paper, to get ink, to find people to do the typesetting. So for a while, it was greatly reduced, the Davoser Blätter, but almost every issue, probably every issue, encouraged people to still come to Davos. And that, it didn't matter what nationality you were, the prices weren't going up, everything was business as usual, but the place did more or less empty out. And Schatzalp was one of 2 sanatoriums that really continued to do well. There was another one called Schweizerhof. But I am digressing, so allow me a minute to look at my notes. So the first section of the first chapter of the book is called Arrival. And in that chapter, Hans Castorp travels from his native Hamburg, the seaport Hamburg, to the Swiss Alps. And he enters Canton Graubünden. So a canton is like a state in the sense that we have states in the United States. I am American, though I went to school in England. And Graubünden, Canton Graubünden, is the biggest, and it's in the southeast. It borders Austria, and then it also borders on the Ticino, the Italian part of Switzerland. So he gets on, so he goes along from Hamburg, he comes to Switzerland, he comes to Zurich, he takes the train. If you come and make this journey, not necessarily from Hamburg, but anywhere, you take the train that goes to Chur, which is the capital of Graubünden. And when you reach a town called Landquart, you get off the train and you switch to the train for Davos. And I like the description of that Thomas Mann gives of Hans Castorp's impression of Landquart, because it was the impression that I had the first time I came to Davos as well. So he writes, after standing for a while in the wind, gazing at a rather uncharming landscape, you climb aboard a narrow gauge train. So that is not the whole excerpt that I was going to do, but when you're in Landquart, and nothing against Landquart, it's a lovely little town, but from the perspective there at the base of the mountains look very daunting. They have this almost threatening and monochrome look to them, and they really do seem like some kind of barrier that separates one world from another. And you're going to, once you go into them, you're going to go past the point of no return. And that was Hans Castorp's impression. It freaks him out a little. But as he notes, then as the train goes up and up and up, and you see the mountains from another perspective, it becomes still daunting, but very beautiful. And when you come to Davos, it is a high alpine valley, and it's divided into two parts. So the original municipality that has the old Rathaus, the city hall, and the post, and all of the important things, the most important and oldest church, St. Johann's, those are all in what is called Davos Platz, and that's the western end of town. And then Davos Village, Davos Dorf, is what you come to first. And the train station there, it doesn't have any office or any attendants. So if you want to check luggage for the night, or if you want to buy a ticket not from a machine, then you need to go to Davos Platz. And before you arrive, you also need to find out where your hotel or your pension or wherever you're going to stay, if it's in Dorf or Platz. And for Schatzalp, you want to get off at Platz. Wald Hotel, it's also now a hotel, is sort of in between. So in between Dorf and Platz, you have this area that historically was called the English Quarter. You have the Hotel Belvedere there, which is older than most of the sanatoriums, maybe older than all of the sanatoriums, and it was an English establishment. Conan Doyle was there, and Robert Louis Stevenson stayed there. And you have, now it's the Kongresszentrum. Now it's the center of where the World Economic Forum takes place. But where the Congress Center is, you used to have the Hotel Angleterre, and you still have the St. Luke's, the Anglican church, but it is no longer an Anglican church, but well worth having a look at for the historical aspect. So Davos Platz in the west, Davos Dorf in the east, the English Quarter in the middle, and Hans Castorp expects to get out at Davos Platz because that's where, the real municipality is, but his cousin is there hailing him and saying, get out here at Davos Dorf. So he gets out, and one of the things that struck me rereading this section is that he actually brought a winter coat with him. He's coming in late August, the end of August, and so it was quite, he was well informed, because the weather can change anytime. There can and will be some years snow in August. This year there was very, very deep snow that fell suddenly in May. And it went away fairly quickly, but while it was here, it was like you were in the middle of winter. So another piece of advice, if you're coming here for the first time, make sure you have clothes for all kinds of weather. And a scarf, a coat, waterproof boots that you can wear in the snow, as well as warm weather clothing. Even if you're coming in January, the sun can be so hot if you're sitting out on a balcony, or if you're coming in the summer, you can have sudden winter weather. So Hans Castorp is smart. He brings his winter coat. And really, thematically, the idea is, and he feels it very keenly, that when you come to Davos, you're entering a different world for more than one reason. For the reason that it's up high in the mountains, and unless that's your native environment, it can be very disorienting, not least because of the weather. And also because of the sanatoriums. So if you're moving into a sanatorium, that is its own form of life that's distinct from anything you would have experienced before. So his arrival coming at the end of August is actually fairly unusual. And the reason he's coming is to visit his sick cousin. But at that time, in 1907, at the time that he would have been arriving, people tended to leave Davos in the summer. It was a winter sport town. The high season was during the winter, and there was this ridiculous notion that it wasn't good for people's health in the summer. So even if the patients at the sanatoriums, if they were able to, they would very often leave and go to some other resort town, maybe a watering place or another TB sanatorium, not in the Alps. And so almost every issue of the Davoser Blätter in the summer and in the spring is trying to persuade people that there's nothing to this idea that Davos is unhealthy in the summer. And of course, it's quite correct. The summer is really beautiful and lovely here. But Hans Castorp would have been arriving at a time when the sanatoriums were really at their lowest time of the year as far as number of patients and number of guests, and also the hotels, although Mann doesn't talk about that. So he arrives at the International Sanatorium Berghof, so based on Wald Sanatorium. And one of the first things that he notes, he's a very observant young man. He's about 24 years old. He's trying to take everything in, feeling very disoriented. And he sees the concierge from the Berghof who's come to pick him up with the braided cap, like we just saw. And the man has a limp, and he remarks on it. And his cousin said, yes, this man had it in the knee, meaning that he had tuberculosis in his knee. So this is something that very often surprises people. I mean, tuberculosis, just like cancer, can be in any part of the body. It can be in the brain, it can be in the bowel, it can be in the genitourinary tract, the reproductive organs, the bones. It can be in the blood, and if it gets in the blood, it very often then will kill people rapidly. It will be galloping consumption. It will go to their brains and kill them very quickly. But in Davos, mostly it was pulmonary tuberculosis that was focused on, although there were people with pulmonary tuberculosis would spread to other parts of the body, and people would stay in Davos and for the treatment of that as well. Sorry, I'm being very clumsy here. Okay, so the open-endedness of stays in sanatoriums is another thing that strikes Hans from the beginning, because he tries to nail his cousin down on how much longer his cousin is going to have to stay. Joachim has already been at the sanatorium for 6 months, and Hans is hoping that he'll come back to Hamburg with him in 3 weeks' time. But Joachim shrugs his shoulders and basically says, who knows? The doctor, you have your checkups at certain intervals, and the doctor will say, well, I think you better stay another 3 months, or I think you better stay another 6 months. And the doctors tended at this time, and also when Grand Duke Dmitri was here, they tended not to be entirely honest with people. If they saw that it was a very serious case, as it is with Joachim, they might say, well, just give it another 3 months. They wanted to keep people here. In some sense benevolently, in the other sense because it was profitable. But so it was open-ended, and that was another point of sort of disorientation that people had. You couldn't think about, I'm going to leave and resume my life at such and such point, and Yeah, you just didn't know. And that was very accurate. And one of the things that I found interesting when I started perusing so this book that we were just looking at, the Davoser Blätter, published the guest list for every single person who was staying in a hotel or sanatorium until 1942, when they stopped doing that. For privacy reasons, I guess, I don't know. But looking at those guest lists, I saw that certain patterns, not only that the sanatoriums and hotels just emptied out in the summer, but also that people who stayed in the sanatoriums were more like Claudia Chauchat, Frau Chauchat, than they were like Hans Castorp. So Hans Castorp, in his 7 years in the sanatorium, never once leaves and stays somewhere else. But most people, a lot of people had TB as a chronic disease, and they would come and go, come and go, come and go, sometimes over the course of many years. I mean, the biggest span that I've seen is a man who got here in 1912, and he's still popping up in the guest list in 1927. And further than that, I haven't gone yet, so who knows? Let's see, there's a reference to sputum, and the fact that patients carried around these little flasks that were usually made of blue glass, although you could actually also get expensive silver ones. And the idea was that you were bringing up phlegm all the time, and you needed to spit into this little receptacle, which would keep everything hygienic. So oddly enough, at that time, people were not so much worried about the airborne contagion from coughs as they were sort of bizarrely obsessed with the idea that if you spit on the ground and the sun dried the spit, or it dried up just naturally and turned into little particles of dust, if people inhaled those little particles of dust, then they would get infected. So there were strict fines, and as a patient, you had to have one of these, and you had to have it with you. And if you were seen spitting on the ground anywhere, it would be a big, big deal. And so these were called, the nickname that you would have for one of these was Blauer Heinrich, which means blue Henry. So I have one, but mine is broken. It's in pieces, unfortunately. Okay, so there's a reference to the brook, which is a little stream or river that divides the valley into a northern part, which is where Schatzalp and the Wald Sanatorium are, and the southern part. And so there is an English writer who was here even a little in advance of the sanatorium era, who said that that local peasants had told him that there was this local lore that when people died on the north side of the valley, their spirits would have to cross the Landwasser, almost like the Jordan River, to the south side of the valley. And I don't know if this was true or if somebody made it up as a joke to tell him, but he said that the local lore was that if you were a psychically sensitive type, you could sometimes see the spirits crossing the Landwasser. So at that time, when Hans Castorp would have been here, the cemetery, the one cemetery in Davos, would have been on the north side. So somebody who died at Schatzalp or Waldhotel would not be crossing the Landwasser to be buried. But later on, the Waldfriedhof, the bigger cemetery, was built, I think, in the 1920s. And it's directly on the other side of the valley. So, for instance, when Grand Duke Dmitri died, his funeral cortege did indeed have to cross the Landwasser from north to south. And patients who were up here at Schatzalp and who were out on their balconies would have had a daily view of the Waldfriedhof, which is in a beautiful little larch grove. On a low mountain slope. So I wonder, I wish I knew if that story that this English author, John Addington Symonds, told is actually something that was in circulation here and something that patients would have heard of. So now we come to Schatzalp specifically. So, as I said earlier, the only sanatorium mentioned by its actual name in the Magic Mountain, and because of its unique position. And so this is, at the moment, I am using the John E. Woods English translation, and in that translation, Joachim tells Hans Castorp, as they're on their way to the Berghof, the highest of the sanatoriums is Schatzalp across the way. You can't see it now. They have to transport the bodies down by bobsled in the winter because the roads are impassable. And Hans Castorp is, he's just hearing one sort of freaky thing after another. He takes it in stride. He even finds it a little funny, but he later has a dream. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but he has a dream of Joachim and a body going down the Schatzalp Bobbahn. And I have some photographs because forget about skiing at that time in Davos history. Winter sport here was bobsledding. Everybody was fanatical about bobsledding. Ice sports, hockey, and bobsledding. And the bobsled run in Davos, which was world-class, it was actually renovated in 1907, so the year that Hans Castorp would have been arriving. And it was called the Schatzalp Bobbahn because it starts right up here at Schatzalp. And I have some photos from 1914 that belong to an architect who was a patient here. He arrived in December 1913. And he took these pictures of, all he had to do was pretty much just walk a few meters outside of the sanatorium, and he came to the start point of the Bobbahn. So this is actually Fastnacht. This is Carnival, which is why, so as you can see, bobsleds don't usually look like this. And there is Sanatorium Schatzalp right in the background. And some people assembled to watch the start of this Fastnacht race. And let's see, here's another one. And, another interesting thing, you can see, only a few of the men are wearing hats, which was unusual. And Joachim, one of the first things Hans notices is that Joachim isn't wearing a hat. And Joachim laughs and tells him, well, men don't wear hats here. And personally, I have no idea why that would have been. I've never heard an explanation for that, but it appears to have been true. Here's another one. These are sort of dressed as hobos, I think. And I should point out in this picture, there is Herr Hutter himself. So the patients would not have been bobsledding, but the patients at Schatzalp could at least watch the start of the race. And this is the Davos ice bear, the polar bear that was a mascot of Davos. There's one more. And just because they happen to be lying here, here's the front of Schatzalp. You can't see, the Bobbahn is hidden from view here. If you come in the winter to Schatzalp, it will look exactly like this. And here is Herr Hutter. He is on the far end, on the right, I guess it would be your left, the man in the sort of gloomy looking man in the dark overcoat. Well, he has his name pointing to him. So this is out in front of Schatzalp, obviously in winter. Who's wearing a hat? Only the women. Okay. And one more thing. This is laying around. This is from the Schatzalp library, the patient's library. There's still a lot of these. They're book plates for the books. And this is an interesting little item. So Hans Castorp would have gotten one of these. Anybody who checked into a hotel or sanatorium would have gotten one of these. It's the Kurkarte. So it allows you certain privileges, basically public transportation. Let me see, what does it say on the back? in English, German, and French. This ticket, which should always be carried in one's pocket and must be produced when required, is personal and not transferable. It admits the bearer to the public grounds of the Kurverein, as well as to the ordinary promenade and symphony concerts shown on the weekly program of the Kurverein Orchestra. When the holder leaves Davos, this ticket must be returned to the hotel or pension proprietor, who is under obligation to hand it over to the Davos Kurverein. Okay, so that's just, the municipality. So I have one of these, but it's very different. It's laminated and it has a QR code. Oh, I had that upside down. So Hans Castorp would have had one of these. Thomas and Katja Mann would have had one of these. And if you come to stay in a hotel here, you will have one of these that looks very different. So let's see, what else do I have? I brought this down even though it's not so relevant. So Thomas Mann talks about all the Russian guests, and this is a book from 1909. So when Castorp, if fictional Castorp had really been here in 1909, he would have been, constantly exposed to the large Russian community, and he might have heard of this scandal. This book is called Sanin, published in 1909, and it was banned in Russia because of all of the modern free love content, controversial content, and they actually had a meeting here in Davos. The Russian community here had a meeting to discuss this book. So when the other day I was looking through some of the old books in storage at Schatzalp, and I found Sanin, it made me laugh. Well, Schatzalp was always an open-minded place, so the patients were no doubt interested, and they had this book, and it was published not in Russia, but in Nice, where there was also a big Russian population. So always finding new treasures here at Schatzalp. And now I'm just rambling. So the next little video in the series will be about the second section of chapter 1 called Room 34. So in this first section, we deal with Hans Castorp coming for the first time to Davos. In the second section, we'll focus on his first entry into the truly unique world of a Davos sanatorium and his own little private part of it, his room. All right, so if you are interested in contacting me or any more information, you can find me, my history blog on the Schatzalp website, so www.schatzalp.ch. And there's a link there. There's my contact information, and there's also a link there to a Facebook group I have, the Sanatorium Schatzalp Facebook group, where I post a lot of the treasures that I come across here and other things about Davos history. And so, check it out and let me know if I can answer any questions or anything else. And thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you next time. Bye.